Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. Welcome back. In this tutorial we're going to look at creating a very simple data model for our application here. So the stuff we've been working on so far is all the GUI part of the application. It's the view. And now I want to create some way of storing the people that are whose details are entered here. So we're going to be looking at kind of the back end, whereas this is the front end. And I'm going to start by creating a new package. So I'm going to go to new package, and I'm going to call that GUI. And I'm going to take all the code that I've got at the moment, so I'll just shift select these files, and I'm going to drag and drop them into GUI. And that's going to refactor my code a little bit so that it puts package GUI at the top of my files. But if I run that, it should still run just fine. And I'm going to create another new package. So new package, which I'll call it model. And model is going to contain classes that deal with my database. And in fact, just to start with, I'm just going to store the data in Java code here. Where my application runs, and later on we'll look at connecting this to a database. But for the moment I'm just going to create some very, very simple data handling classes. And now the golden rule here is that stuff in your model should absolutely never reference stuff in your view. The stuff in the back end should never reference stuff in the front end, to say it in another way. So in the classes and model, I should never ever have a statement that says import GUI, whereas the GUI may well reference the model. Although often the GUI communicates with the model exclusively through controller classes, which we'll look at in future. But right now I'm going to start by creating a class in my model, and I'm going to call this person. And person is going to be a class that stores people while the application is running. So it's going to be a lot like this form event class, except that whereas the form event just takes whatever data comes back from the form and transmits it to the main frame, my person class should be much more tight in terms of the way it stores data. The person class, well, we'll see in a minute, but it's going to store data in the kind of clearest form possible, and it's going to, we're going to have some notion of really trying to ensure data integrity here. So so I've got my person's going to have a name, but I'm also going to give it a private ID, and the ID is going to be the unique key of my persons, my people, in the database, which I'm going to connect up in future. Now string name is fine, but let's take a look at this form actually. So occupation again is just a string, but age category here, there's only 3 choices, so it shouldn't really be a string. It should be something which is limited to 3 values when we store it in the actual kind of data model or in a database. And if you have a SQL database, you probably use some kind of enum type, and we can do the same thing in Java. So let's create a new class here in the model. I'll make it actually a new enumeration, an enum, and I'm going to call that enum age category. And the age category is only going to have 3 possible values, under 18, 18 to 65, and 65 or over. So let's call those categories child, adult, senior. So we go. So this is a enum, and then in my person here, I can change the age category from an int, which could be anything, to a age category. Okay, And the employment category is going to be similar because employment here is, well, actually, it's probably not going to be similar because the thing is that people can type what they want in here. So let's probably leave that as a string. I'm just kind of thinking on my feet here. I think actually I'm going to create a employment category as well. So I'll right click the model again and I'll go to new class and I'll call that employment category. And let's just say here that we can have employed in here, self-employed. Let's maybe capitalize this, employed. Some people put these enumeration constants in all capital letters, but I'm not going to worry too much here. And unemployed. And we could have a category other for if they type something in themselves, and you could go to the trouble of storing other separately. Actually, I meant not to make that a class, but a num. So whatever they type in other, you might want to store it separately, but I think for this little application here, I'm just going to store other if someone types something into this combo box. And then the other stuff we need a boolean for US citizen, probably int for tax ID, I don't know, or string. And we've got male or female as well. So I think since again male or female has 2 values, or it may have 3, because apparently these days often you can put other on a gender form. Then let's give this let's create a new enum here. So not a new class but a new enum, and let's make this let's call this gender, and let's give this values of male and female. So that'll do. And now in my person class here, I can say that the gender has type gender. So I'm just using enums for the situations where I've got 3 strings or 2 strings, but they can only actually have 2 or they can only take 1 of 2 or 3 values. They're not actually free text. It makes sense to have an enum to store them. So I think that's all okay now. So employment category, that's going to be type employment category like this. Tax ID, probably a string, really. That looks okay. So now let's go ahead and create the getters and setters. So I'll right click, go to source, generate getters and setters, and I want to generate getters and setters for all of them here like this. And for the moment I'll just give it I don't know if I really want a constructor, because to create a constructor with all these values is going to be quite long. I may do actually. Let's say public person, and why not? So let's say int ID. In fact, I'll miss out ID for the moment, so I've got a set ID. I'll just give it a string name, string occupation, age category, age cat, let's say. Let's make it age category, why not? Employment category, string tax ID, boolean US citizen, and gender. And this, of course, we'll have to do this dot name equals name. This is a bit boring, so this dot occupation equals occupation. I don't know if there are any shortcuts in Eclipse for dealing with this kind of thing. I suspect not. And this dot employment category, called it emp category, empcat there, so let's call it empcat here as well, why not? Empcat equals empcat, and this dot tax ID equals tax ID. This dot US citizen, we're almost there, equals US citizen, and this dot gender equals gender. Now I will make the ID increment itself. I'll put a private static count. Let's just explicitly set it to 0, although it will be initialized to 0 anyway, and that should be a type int. And then in here I can say this dot ID equals count and count plus plus. So every time I create a new person, it'll increment the count. That should be semicolon. And if I then set the ID explicitly afterwards, it will override this value here, which is good. So I'm just using this static variable, classic use of a static variable, just to count how many people there are and to create an ID there. So now I've got a person class that can store people in some kind of database, and I'm just going to do something really simple here. I'm just going to right click and create a new class, and I'm going to call that, let's call it database for the moment. And database, I'm going to give it a private array list of people. So let's put person in this array list and set that equal to, well, let's give it a constructor. So public database, and let's say that people equals new array list of person. And this is going to be the class that I'm just going to use for the moment to store people in my database. And then we could have a method, for example, I'll add to this as I go along, but like public void add person, which just accepts a person and just says people.add person. And we could have a method that gets the array list, so public, let's say list of person. So I'll use the list interface and say get people like this, and just return people. I have to be careful because you can modify this using the return value of this, but I won't worry about that too much. Let's just add the import there, Java util list. So now I've got a little database thing that can store people while the application's running, and I'm going to work on this, and later on we're going to connect it to an actual database. And in the next tutorial I'm going to create some controller code that's going to kind of interface between the view here and the model here, and it's going to allow me to add people to this sort of database, and then later on we can look at representing those people visually. So that's it for this tutorial, and the next tutorial, as I say, we'll extend this a bit further and we'll actually start storing people. So join me again then, and until next time, happy coding.